Somewhere in a small Arkansas church, an old man rises to sing an old hymn, and for a few minutes, thousands of people watching on their phones become absolutely convinced they are listening to a ghost. Not a metaphor, not a figure of speech. A genuine, spine-tingling conviction that the king of rock and roll never actually died in 1977, that he walked away from the fame that was crushing him, and that he spent the last 5 decades hiding in plain sight as a small-town preacher named Bob Joyce. It sounds absurd when you say it out loud, and yet the videos keep coming. The views keep climbing, and the comment sections keep filling with people swearing on everything they hold dear that they know what they heard. And what they heard was Elvis. This is a story of how that belief was built, piece by piece, out of nothing more than a resemblance, a voice, and humanity's oldest weakness, the refusal to accept that the people we love are really gone. It starts, as these things often do, with a video nobody expected to matter. Sometime in the early 2010s, a clip surfaced online of a preacher in Benton, Arkansas, singing gospel standards to his small congregation. There was nothing unusual about the setting. Folding chairs, modest lighting, the kind of church you drive past without a second look. But the voice that came out of this man stopped people cold. It was deep, warm, and aching in exactly the right places, climbing and followed with phrasing that sounded uncannily like recordings cut more than half a century earlier by a Memphis truck driver turned global icon. Gospel music, after all, was a genre Elvis Presley always said was closest to his heart, the sound he returned to whenever the noise of stardom became too much. So when a stranger in a country church picked up those same sacred songs and sang them with that same trembling reverence, something in the algorithm and in the audience lit up. The clip spread the way these things always do now. Shared, reposted, stitched into compilation videos, captioned with increasingly breathless claims. By the back half of the 2010s, the story had grown large enough that even mainstream outlets were running headlines built around the tantalizing question of whether Elvis might somehow still be alive and preaching under another name. Fans who had spent their entire lives loving Presley's music began making pilgrimages to Arkansas, driving hundreds of miles just to sit in a wooden pew and hear this man sing in person. Because a video on a screen was no longer enough. And overwhelmingly, according to the accounts that circulated, people did not leave more skeptical. They left more certain, because standing a few feet away from that voice, in a room with no stage lighting and no theatrics, made the resemblance feel less like performance and more like an encounter. If the story had stayed contained to a remarkable singing voice, it likely would have faded the way most viral curiosities do. A fun rumor, a strange coincidence, forgotten within a news cycle. What kept it alive, and what pushed it from internet curiosity into full-blown obsession, was everything that surrounded the voice. Believers began combing through photographs of the pastor's family, insisting that his sons carried the same jawline, the same eyes, the same easy smile that had made one man's face among the most recognized on the planet. When one of those sons performed a song publicly associated with Presley, the clip tore through fan communities, framed not as a tribute but as evidence, proof, in the eyes of the convinced, of a bloodline quietly passing itself down, hidden from the world for 2 generations. Then came the photographs. A private image, reportedly shared by a family member, began circulating with claims that it finally offered undeniable proof of the connection. Alongside it came whispers of another photo, one that supposedly showed a woman, resembling Elvis's former wife, standing near the pastor, as though she had traveled quietly into rural Arkansas just to see him. And when Presley's daughter passed away and was laid to rest, a grainy image began making rounds online, claimed by some to show the Arkansas preacher seated among the mourners, a detail that, if true, believers argued, would make no sense unless he was something far more significant than a stranger who happened to look and sound like a legend. Each of these pieces, taken alone, could be picked apart, explained, or simply shrugged off. But stacked together, the voice, the sons' faces, a leaked photo, a mysterious blonde woman, a seat at a funeral, they formed something that felt, to millions of casual viewers scrolling late at night, less like a coincidence and more like a case. And a case needs a verdict. What the internet wanted, more than anything else, was a confession. For years, that confession never quite arrived, and that absence became, perversely, the most persuasive evidence of all. When the pastor did eventually address the rumors publicly, years back, the language attributed to him in various reports was careful, almost deliberately soft. Accounts describe him saying that neither he nor those around him had ever tried to convince anyone he was somebody else, a statement that, to a mind already primed to find a secret, seemed to dance right up to the edge of denial without ever actually crossing it. He reportedly went on to acknowledge that most people who came to hear him already understood he wasn't Elvis, but added that it didn't seem to matter much to them anyway. Since the Presley were alive, he said he considered him a brother in spirit, a kindred soul bound by faith rather than blood. To skeptics, that's a gracious, faintly poetic way of deflecting a rumor, without making a scene out correcting it. To true believers, it read as something else entirely. A wink, a coded truth spoken in the only language a man could use if he had spent 50 years guarding an impossible secret. One devoted fan, in comments widely shared across fan forums, put it plainly. He said he believed the pastor simply was Elvis, and that he prayed for the day the man would finally stand up and admit it. That is the strange engine at the center of this entire phenomenon. The denials became proof. The humility became evidence. And the silence, rather than closing the story, became a promise that something bigger was still coming. Which brings us to the wave of videos that arrived more recently. The ones built entirely around a single, emotionally loaded premise. That the old preacher, now visibly aged and reportedly in fragile health, had finally decided the time had come to tell the truth before it was too late. These videos are dramatic by design. Somber music, slow zooms, ominous narration promising that after decades of hiding, the confession the world had been waiting for was finally, truly, about to be spoken aloud. And then you watch, and you keep watching, and the confession never comes. Not in one version of these videos. Not in any of them. The music swells. The tension builds toward a moment that never actually arrives, and the clip simply ends, leaving the viewer emotionally worked over and no closer to any actual truth than before they press play. It's worth sitting with that for a second, because it's a whole trick laid bare. The promise of a revelation, engineered specifically to generate clicks and watch time, followed by nothing at all. Some of the very posts hosting these videos have quietly admitted, in their own accompanying text, that no direct confirmation was ever actually given, burying that admission beneath a headline built entirely around the opposite implication. So let's set the theatrics aside and look at what is actually verifiably true. Elvis Aaron Presley was born in January of 1935. Bob Joyce, according to public records associated with him, was born in 1952, a gap of roughly 17 years. Had Presley lived, he would be well into his 90s today. The pastor at the center of this story has, by all documented accounts, always appeared to be a man of a noticeably younger generation, a fact that alone undercuts the premise before any other evidence is even weighed. Then there's the matter of Presley's death itself, which was never a vanishing, never an unexplained disappearance, never a case with a missing chapter. He died at his Graceland home in August of 1977 at the age of 42. That death was witnessed by people close to him, formally documented by Tennessee medical and legal authorities, and supported by records that still exist and have been reviewed extensively in the decades since. There is no gap in that history, waiting to be filled by a secret second act. It is, as tragic as it was to the millions who mourned him, a closed and thoroughly documented event. As for Bob Joyce's own life, it has reportedly been part of the public record for decades, including, by multiple accounts, a marriage dating back to the mid-1970s, long before the rumor ever existed to give that marriage any mythological weight. And the funeral photograph so often cited as damning proof? Investigations into the image reportedly identified the man in question not as Bob Joyce at all, but as a country musician who simply shared a passing resemblance in a low-quality photo, a case of mistaken identity that spread far faster than the correction ever could, because corrections rarely travel with the same speed as a good mystery. It's also worth noting that even at the height of this rumor's popularity, polling on the broader Elvis is alive belief has consistently shown that only a small minority of people ever genuinely accepted it as fact. The legend has never survived because the evidence behind it was strong. It has survived because so many people wanted, on some level, for it to be true, and wanting something to be true has always been a far more powerful force than proof. So here's a plain answer, stated without the theatrics. Bob Joyce is not Elvis Presley. There was never a hidden confession waiting to be unlocked. because there was never a secret to confess in the first place. He appears to be exactly what he has always presented himself as, a small-town preacher gifted with a remarkable, genuinely moving voice for the old hymns, a voice that happens to echo one of the most beloved sounds in American music history. And if that feels like a small, almost disappointing place to land after all that buildup, don't be embarrassed by that feeling, because that feeling is the real story here. This was never really about a preacher in Arkansas. It was about us, and about a grief that has never fully abated death certificate. For nearly 50 years, people have kept Elvis alive in blurry roadside sightings and hopeful rumors, not because they're gullible, but because love doesn't dissolve just because the person carrying it is gone. That instinct isn't foolish. It's deeply, achingly human. What has changed, and changed with alarming speed, is that this very human longing has become something to be harvested. Across the past year alone, real religious figures with genuine followings have had their faces and voices cloned by artificial intelligence, used to beg unsuspecting strangers for money in videos that never actually happened. Some of those figures have had to publicly warn their own audiences that the version of them online, mouth moving and voice speaking in perfect sync, was manufactured entirely from nothing. Consumer protection agencies have begun tracking AI-driven impersonation scams as their own distinct category of fraud, and the losses attached to that category, even in a short span of time, run into the hundreds of millions of dollars. A kind, aging pastor with a beautiful gospel voice and a devoted, emotionally invested audience is, unfortunately, an almost perfect target for that machinery. He offers a warm, trustworthy face, a library of freely available footage, and a fan base already primed to believe in miracles. For anyone chasing clicks without a shred of concern for who gets hurt along the way, that combination is simply too valuable to leave alone, and will keep getting exploited for exactly as long as audiences keep clicking without pausing to ask whether what they're watching is actually real. So the next time a video promises you a deathbed confession, a secret finally spoken aloud, a decades-old mystery cracked wide open by a familiar, trembling voice, it's worth pausing before you feel your heart leap. Because what's actually being sold to you in that moment isn't the truth about a beloved singer who died in 1977. It's your own hope, repackaged and handed back to you by someone who has no real interest in King, and even less interest in you. Recognizing that pull for what it is maybe the only real defense we have left, not against a myth about Arkansas,